Seh Elohim, we thank you for this time together. We thank you for this time to study. Master, we strive to do everything that we do according to your word. We ask tonight that you will open our eyes, open our ears, and open our hearts so that we can learn something and maybe unlearn some things. We ask you for it in the name of your restoration. Yahshua. All right. Francois is going to explain a little table that they concocted about how to determine.
That's right. So if you do something. Okay, so what we did is we actually have a disc, just an old plate, and then you actually make equal markings because each of the markings will actually line up with the day. Whether it's going to start at sundown or 12 to 12, doesn't matter. You just want to get the day straight.
We're trying to determine, first of all, when the first day of Pesach would actually take place, according to the Torah calendar.
And the main problem we have is some people are doing dark moon and some people are doing slither of the new moon. And some people call the dark moon the new moon. The problem is if you look at NASA, you're going to find 2 days that's normally dark moon, right? And then there's some other stuff. If you look in Zohar and where they actually had 2 witnesses, and in some cases the 2 witnesses actually was taken away at the dispersion. So now people all over the place and they need a calendar for everybody to line up. But so this is just for us, we want to do the right moon. So Lorene came up with the idea of counting backwards from the full moon. So to get the full moon and the dark moon, just go to NASA's website, and they have the stuff in there. And this is for the month of April. What you're going to find is on 6 and 7, there's going to be a total dark moon. And here on the 21st, you're going to find there's a full moon. All right. The problem is to fit this in there, because this is Yehovah saying, count 10 days from the beginning of the month, go and select the lamb, keep it for 4 days. At the end of the 14th, do the Passover, and the next day actually start your unleavened bread for 7 days. So this is actually Yehovah's calendar piece over here. The other thing is there's a verse, and I don't remember what it was, but
Psalm 81:3 in your English Bible.
That's the one, and the other one is where the woman says to the guy, come in, my husband has gone away, he's taken all the silver with him, and he'll return on the full moon, which we believe full moon is this one. So now, also, if you're going to see, the problem is, so Passover is going to be on the 14th. If you count backwards, you can't get to the dark moon. There's more than 14 days between full moon and dark moon.
So sliver, right?
Yeah, so it points to the slither in this case. If you actually do slip it by 1 day, what's going to happen is, well, in this case you're lucky that your unleavened bread actually lines up with this one. So there's a possibility. Whereas if you do the first day of the dark moon, now it keeps sliding out of phase, right? And that's what this doohickey does.
Doohickey. That's exactly what I would have named it, doohickey. So, so we look at a quandary. Okay, how do we figure out? How do we figure out what day we are supposed to keep the Passover of Elohim according to his calendar? I want to read a couple of things just for you to have them in mind, and then we'll take a look at this study. First, I'm going to read from Yeshayahu, which is Isaiah. Yeshayahu is a name that means Yahuwah redeems, delivers, and restores. So it's a very important piece of scripture that we're going to consider out of this, and it's Isaiah 49:13. Let me there. 49:13. And I'm going to read 13 through, get my little, one of my Sunday youths made me a paper elephant page marker, so, but, and like I say, I'm going to read these, just keep these in the back of your head as we go through our study. But Isaiah 49, beginning in 13, says, "Sing, O heavens, rejoice, O earth, and break out in singing, O mountains. For Yahuwah shall comfort his people and have compassion on his afflicted ones." The idea here is that the heavens rejoice and that they break out in singing. The earth rejoices and it breaks out in singing. This thing that we're going to consider is Job. And this is chapter 38, verses 31 through 37. And here, Yahweh is asking Job these questions when they're having their last little piece of debate here. But Yahweh asks, "Do you bind the bands of Kemah or loose the cords of Casil? Do you bring out the constellations in its season, or do you lead the bear with its sons?" Now the bear is one of the constellations in the sky. "Do you know the laws of the heavens? Do you set their rule over the earth?" And this is a very important thing. We always say, okay, well, the realm of Elohim rules over the earth, but there's a lot more to that the heavens actually, we're going to find, control a lot of the things that happen on the earth. And this is a very important thing for our study tonight. "Do you lift up your voice to the clouds so that the floods of water cover you? Do you send out lightnings and they go and say to you, 'Here we are'?" That's the light in and of itself speaks. What was going on the mount when the Shekinah of Elohim came down as the shofar was blowing when they received the Ten Commandments? "Who has put wisdom in the inward parts?" Now that's a very important thing. Who has put wisdom in the inward parts? "And who has given understanding to the heart? Who has wisdom to count the clouds or to tip over the bottles of the heavens?" So, very important ideas presented within these verses as we look at our study tonight. So, this is called Keeping the Torah Calendar, Worshiping in Spirit and in Truth. So before we look at anything, let's consider the way things were created. So we're going to take a look at Bereshit 1, 14 through 19. "And Elohim said, 'Let there be lights in the firmament of the heavens to divide the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years. And let them be for lights in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth.' And it was so." And that's a very important verse, to give light upon the earth. You know, we think about, okay, the sun's out, it's light outside, but we're going to find out that that's so much more important than simply daylight. "And Elohim made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. And he made the stars also." And that's important. You know, we look at it as kind of like an afterthought. Oh, yeah, I forgot to write that in, but it's a very important thing. And let's see, where were we? "And Elohim set them in the firmament of the heaven to give light upon the earth, and to rule over the day and over the night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And Elohim saw that it was good. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day." Now, the fourth day in and of itself is a very important idea if we consider that the letter Dalet in and of itself represents a door. It's a very important thing that we're going to start to find how much this day of creation plays in our role, not only in existing, but also in being able to communicate with Yahuwah, our Elohim. Yahuwah is a name that we've said, well, it means everything there is, was, and will be today, yesterday, and tomorrow. But as a name, it means existence. So it's a very important thing that we're going to take a look at tonight. So, the calendar that was described in the Torah is very precise. If we say that we strive to keep the word of Yahuwah Elohim and worship him and him alone, then we have to keep to his schedule of time. If we keep his feasts and festivals according to the rabbinical calendar, which is what we do, and we've done it for a long time because up until a few days ago we didn't think it was important enough to look further into it for some reason. Some people did, and for all of us, it's a good thing that they brought it up. So, if we keep the feasts and the festivals according to the rabbinical calendar, then we are in a sense giving our devotion and even our worship to the rabbis that developed it. If we keep the feasts and festivals according to the Gregorian calendar, then our allegiance would be to the papacy of the Roman Catholic Church. Okay? Who set the lights in the firmament for us to be able to tell the seasons and the times? Yahuwah Elohim. And when we go and we start looking at this in Shemot, he gives very, very explicit, detailed instructions on what to do. So, all this being said, there are even more critical reasons for keeping the Torah calendar. Reasons that we don't understand, or reasons that we don't want to understand because they are labeled taboo by the established religious community. Let's consider some of these reasons as specifically as possible within the scope of this study. We can't go very deep into this, but we go through life simply considering that we're human beings, and that's as far as it goes. Scientific fact, and I went and I looked at all this scientific fact. I took my son Asher to the studio yesterday, and I sat down and talked with the recording engineer, who is a sound engineer for another company, and he was talking to me about the effects of long wave forms and short wave forms on the human body, that they actually mess with the brain. And it was kind of interesting. He just said it in passing with Asher that there was these ultra low frequencies that he couldn't hear, but all of a sudden his inside started turning as if he needed to go and, well, you know. But anyway, so it's a very important idea that we think here. The scientific fact is that we are bioelectric creatures made of energy that vibrates to a certain frequency. Now, science has illustrated that we are affected by the way the planets move. It affects the electrical vibrations that come from them to the Earth, how the electromagnetic shield that surrounds the Earth reacts, and in essence, how all life on the planet itself reacts. The orbit of the moon and the position of the sun affect the electrical pulses on the Earth, and it's because of these pulses that our heart beats, our moods are affected, even how cancer cells either grow or not, and the biggie is whether we are able to pay attention and perceive. Have you ever woke up one day feeling like a total wet rag without having done anything? Have you ever had days where you can't remember anything, you can't pay attention to anything for some reason? Have you ever had days where you're just totally spot on and you can just focus in on everything and everything. All of this is because brain waves are affected by, well, let's take for example, we're standing outside. A wave of light that's just traveled 186,000 miles a second ago goes through you, exits you, and a second later is already 186,000 miles away. We're affected by frequencies. And this is, okay, this is a bunch of scientific, metaphysical mumbo-jumbo, but it's very, very important that we understand this, to understand why the Torah calendar is so absolutely specific that the planets have to be exactly in this way. So we'll take a look here. So we begin with the first month that, contrary to what we've come to believe, is not called Abib. It is when Abib occurs that we can identify the first month. Abib is when the barley is still in the ear or in its husk. And the word Abib in and of itself means ear. So let's consider some verses from Shemot 9. Now, what's happened here is Pharaoh's having a hard time making up his mind. And this is an important thing. He says, okay. Then he says, no, it's not okay. Then he says, okay. Then he says, no, it's not okay. Even when he lets them go, he says, I made a mistake. I'm going to send the army out after them. Very important. Very important. But these verses in Shemot 9, verse 31 and 32 says, and the flax and the barley were smitten, for the barley was in the ear, and the flax was in bloom. But the wheat and the spelt were not smitten, for they ripen late. The barley was at a stage, if we consider the stages of barley, we have the first stage is the vegetable stage of barley. It's growing. We have the second stage where we call it the budding stage or the cotton stage, where it starts to bud out and it looks kind of puffy and stuff. Then we have what's called the pod stage. Then we go to the milk stage, and then we come to the stage of the barley that we're looking for. It's called the dough stage, the Abib, in other words. This is where it's still in the husk, it's still in the ear, it's still enclosed, but it's gone from being a milky, loose substance to now it has a dough-like consistency. And if we let the barley go on to its next stage, it's the hard dough or caramel stage, and then it's ripe, and then we harvest it because the barley's hard. But in the dough stage is when we would offer it on Shavuot as a first fruit, because we can take it from the dough stage and we can actually parch it and finish the process of completing the barley. So it's also the first fruits that occurs. Yeah, so it's a very important thing. So this tells us that the barley was in a late stage of maturity because it was in the head or in the ear. It was Abib. So immediately after the locust came and destroyed what was left, when the locust came, they ate up the wheat that was still in its vegetable stage, or not in its vegetable stage, but let's say cotton stage. It was still flexible. The hail's not going to do much damage to something that bends and flexes, but those pesky little locusts, they like to eat this stuff. But anyway, the point here is that the barley is ready at the first of the year in Egypt and in the land of Israel, specifically in the south of Israel in the spring. We go any farther north, it's not going to be in the spring. This occurred in Egypt. So we have to think about Egypt and the Negev as the points of reference. Negev is the south of Israel. Here in Texas, it's a winter crop, so we can't go by when the barley, reaches this point here in Texas because the formula won't work. So, because of this, we can consider Abib occurring in the areas of Egypt and Israel, and as a time declared by Yahweh according to the following verse in Shemot 12, that he says to Moses and Aaron, he says, "This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you." So when the Abib occurs, that's going to be the first month. But we'll find out a little bit more in a minute. Now, Yahweh Elohim declares that this is the first month, because Abib takes place. Elohim does not name it Abib. He says it's the first month. Abib takes place. Abib is an action that takes place, or a process that takes place with the barley. In fact, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, we're not going to find names assigned to the months. Now, we might find them in parentheses, but if they're in parentheses, they are not in the actual Hebrew of the Scripture. Now, the assigning of names to the month, like Nisan, Iyar, Sivan, etc., that began in the exile in Babylon, where the Hebrews took the Babylonian practices and named the 12 months after Babylonian deities. So hence, the first month in today's Hebrew is no longer because of Abib. It's called Nisan, named after the deity Nisanu, the presiding or the main deity of the Babylonian pantheon. And the balance follows as such. Iyar, named after Ayaru, the deity of life and water. Sivan, after Sivanu, the deity of the moon. Tammuz, after Dumuzu, the deity of vegetation, whose celebrations during the Babylonian period included the decoration of trees. He is also considered the deity of punishment and the underworld. Av, the deity Abu, the deity of fire. Elulu, the reigning deity of the month of Ishtar, which is the deity of the harvest. Tishrei, Tahritu, the second part of the Babylonian year, that's presided over by the deity Shamash, the deity of the sun. Then we have Hezvan, the Babylonian month of Arksama, or Araksama, that's presided over by the deity Marduk, and this Hebrew month is actually called Mar-Shevan. Then we have Tevet, the Babylonian month Tevetu, meaning violent rain, that's presided over by Papsukai, just a cool name, Papsukai, the messenger deity. Shevat, Shabbatu, the deity of rain, and Adar, the Babylonian month of threshing called Adaru, presided over the deity Era, an Akkadian deity of plague who is also responsible for political confusion. Now, consider what was going on during the month of Adar, which is, we read Esther. What was happening during this time? That Vashti revolted, he exiled Vashti. A Hebrew girl takes on a Greek name to go into the court. There's assassination attempts, a coup's attempted. They're wanting to wipe out the Jews, so she goes and intercedes. A whole lot of political turmoil going on. So it's a story that tells us about political incorrectness, so to speak. But Adar, the Babylonian month of threshing. So the Tanakh does not make use of any of these names, but rather mentions the first month, the second month, the third month, etc. If we read Scripture, especially in Torah, it's going to say, on the first month of the whatever year, or in the whatever year, on the first month, on the whatever day, Elohim said this. So, it doesn't use the names. The Gregorian calendar is no different than the rabbinical calendar. Instead, it uses the names of Greco-Roman deities to name the months. This is why we should begin to retrain ourselves into equating the feasts and festivals of Yahuwah Elohim with the number of the month instead of the given name of the month. It's one thing for us to go on vacation in March. We're going on vacation in March. Or to say, I have this project that I have to take care of in April. One of my favorite months is June, especially the 1st. Okay, so we keep up with time this way. Elohim's calendar is in such a way that we look at it and say, okay, here is this phase of the moon in this month, and now I have to find out how many days exactly to count to Shabbat, for example, so that I can celebrate Shabbat according to Yahuwah Elohim. Or in this case, okay, well, we're saying, oh, well, we've got to make all these arrangements for Pesach, and we've got to do this and do that, and we need time to plan it out. The only thing is, we get a 2-week window that tells us when it's going to occur if we keep the Torah calendar according to Yahuwah Elohim. Now, we can use what's called the Hillel 2 calendar, the rabbinical calendar, and project, okay, it's going to be in this block of time. But what Elohim is wanting us to do is not to depend on our ability to plan things far ahead, but rather to depend on Him to get us to where we have to go from one point to another. So it's a very important aspect here. So we have to retrain ourselves, so to speak. So it's one thing to go on vacation in March, and it's another thing totally to say that the Passover, Shavuot, or Sukkot falls on the month of Nisan or Tishrei, or it falls in April, or whatever month Tishrei happens to fall on that particular time. So we have established that the first month begins when the barley is still in the ear, or we're going to get to the point where we're going to say this is where the month begins, because we only know that that's where the first month is going to be. It's not necessarily just simply finding the barley. Now, this particular thing was still in effect during Yahshua's time. This is a really cool book, very easy to read. It's called the Torah Calendar. The calendar our Creator asks us to keep. It's by Norman B. Willis. We'll pass it around. But the Talmud, we say, okay, we don't want to really keep the halakha of the Talmud because it's something that the rabbis have pushed, and there's a whole lot of things in Talmud that go contrary to Torah. But it gives us a lot of history and a lot of perspective. And this, what I'm going to read, is from the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, Tractate 23b, that was written around the time of Yahshua. And it's how they verify something, the crescent sliver of the moon, what we'll talk about in just a second. So it says, how do they test the witnesses? The pair who arrive first are tested first. The senior of them is brought in, and they say to him, tell us how you saw the moon, in front of the sun or behind the sun, to the north of it or to the south. How big was it? Which direction was it inclined, and how broad was it? If he says in front of the sun, his evidence is rejected. Now, it's not really rejected, it's just put to the side. After that, they would bring in the second and test him. They'd ask him the same things. And if their accounts were the same, then the evidence was accepted, and then they would establish, well, this is the sliver of the moon, and that's a very important thing, because when we had our discussion Tuesday, what we're saying, okay, well, is it on the new moon, when it's dark, or is it the crescent sliver of the moon? How do we tell? Is the full moon, when it says full moon,